We got right to here, didn't we? That look right? All right. So what would happen to the small farmers because of the whiskey tax? Yeah, they go bankrupt. And they're hoping they would become what? What was Hamilton over? Yeah. And what kind of wages? Low wages. That shows you his attitude. Literally, he wanted to crush people's souls, destroy their dreams, make their life a living hell, so companies could have cheap labor. That gives you a good idea what kind of person Alexander Hamilton was. And not that Madison and Jefferson were all that noble towards small farmers, but still a little different. Remember, these two are also slaveholders. Hamilton had slaves. He invested in them as a speculative function. So let's put the watch.
Caution.
Huh?
Focus, laser focus.
But not again.
Promise.
Okay. Yeah. So where are we at here? Did we get to, and it passed, what was the rebellion? Yeah, the Whiskey Rebellion. And who led the army, at least at first? Washington himself. And this crushed any democratic movement for 30 years. Any movement for a democracy, which is crushed by the Whiskey Rebellion. So we got the Bank of the U.S., we get Hamilton, we get the implied powers.
We stopped here. Yeah.
Okay, so the boss. Hamilton said, the government has the power to print money. Therefore, it's implied in the Constitution that necessary and the proper clause opened the door for this. Open the door. Have you guys noticed the rat? Just throwing that out there for people. There's now a flower.
Always notice the rat.
Crown, Jolly Rancher, money. Sacrifices have got to be made to the rat. Oh, one more thing. Have you guys noticed the rug? It's pretty cool, isn't it? Yeah. That one, the rat is, an amazing animal. The rug is just cool. So it's implied by the necessary and proper clause. Implied in the Constitution. That's why they called it the elastic clause too, because you could stretch out the power to encompass so many things. Now, this is going to be, they'll get a contract for what will basically be the first corporation. It's not quite a corporation like you might think of today. That's still 40 years away. What country was the first corporation as we know it created? It's the most obvious country. Belgium. So, right, you're all thinking Belgium, weren't you? You're all thinking it. Well, charter's a contract, but a corporation is owned by shareholders. So if you didn't know that, you're shareholders, stockholders, you get a piece of the profit. They're going to invest in this corporation. If you did not know shareholders or stockholders owned a corporation, make sure you put that down, just so you don't forget, or you weren't sure. This is like a joint stock company. They invest in this bank expecting to get money back. It's a private company, but they have a contract called a charter given by the government. All corporations have a contract or charter. They're created by government. And they would collect the tax revenues from like the whiskey tax or the tariff. So the money would come in, and they would use that money to back currency. They would issue currency. Here's a $50 note from the Bank of the United States. So basically telling the people, if you get a piece of paper that says it's $50 from the Bank of the United States, we promise it's worth $50 because we collect tax revenues. Now this was still in gold and silver. It's based upon that. In 100 years, they would have something literally called the gold standard. We're not quite to that yet, but based upon this. And therefore, they can control the money supply. They can issue more money, get more money in circulation, inflation. Pull money out, so quit printing money, or withhold it for a while, deflation. They can control the money supply. Remember, the money supply is such a big issue. That's what the Federal Reserve does today. But it's also a bank. They could use that money to issue currency in the form of loans. But it's very specific on who they issue money to merchant capitalists who want to start banks. And they're going to start private banks They'll loan money to start a banking industry, and then the banking industry would provide credit for the new industry that Hamilton envisions. So that's how he's going to indirectly help business by making money available through the national bank and their charter for private banking and therefore credit. Business cannot function without credit. And so you got the stable money supply and now credit. The banking industry would start in the United States because of the Bank of the United States. The good and bad elements of this. And make credit available outside of either merchants just loaning money or the very long process of borrowing money from the Bank of Amsterdam. That's the first national bank. This would be built across the street from the executive mansion. Today it's still there across the street from the White House, but it's not the national bank anymore. It's actually a private bank, the first national bank. But it's the cool, they called it Republican or classic style copy in Rome. So that's his bank. Well, you can imagine the reaction of Jefferson and Hamilton. I'm sorry, Jefferson and Madison. Remember Madison, their party's Republican Party? Oh, so Hamilton's party, what party is that? Yeah, the Federalists. Well, they saw this and they immediately realized, okay, we got our capital, soon to be Washington, D.C., but we kind of lost on the Assumption Bill, even though it didn't quite affect the way that Hamilton dreamed. But as they saw, shareholders for this company, who all they want is money, that's why they buy stock or shares of the first bank. They can now control the economy. That means the merchant class can control the money supply. They can create inflation or deflation at whim to benefit themselves. If they want to speculate, inflation. If they want to preserve their wealth, hoard it, deflation. And they can manipulate the economy for personal gain. And Hamilton kind of knew this, but he said in the charter, it'll make sure that won't happen. I should add, that's exactly what's going to happen in the Second Bank of the United States in 1835. Exactly. They would try to manipulate the economy for personal gain. And here's the other one. This is the one they really pushed on, because this is complex for people. This one, it's not an enumerated power. It wasn't listed. And I put an arrow to Hamilton. Hamilton is just like, you've got to be kidding. James Madison wrote the necessary and proper clause. And now you're telling me you can't use it? James Madison even said the national or the necessary and proper clause would be good for something like a bank in the Federalist Papers. And now you're against it? Hamilton just could not believe the hypocrisy of Madison. Now, Madison didn't see it as hypocrisy at all. I have no problem with a bank. I have a problem with you. I don't trust Hamilton's bank. Maybe a bank might be good down the road, but not your bank. So that's the dividing line. So too much power in the hands of the wealthy, the enumerated powers. But that's why I showed you Hamilton and Jefferson, man and state. I know I keep bringing that up because I know it's happy memories for all of you. But it really lays out those different attitudes really well. Well, Washington, I put the arrow up for saying he's for the bank. Washington believed in Hamilton's argument. Why? He's a speculator and wants credit. Washington wants credit to buy land in the West. So it passed, but only for 20 years. It would have to be renewed again in 1812. Gee, I wonder if it would be renewed just in time to go to war. And ironically, the president, when that was renewed, was James Madison. And these arguments are still very fresh. So that's the Bank of the United States. So we have the two big things. Assumption Bank. Third, tariff. Hamilton wanted a protective tariff. He wrote in his report on manufacturers that we need a high tariff. Remember, that's a tax on imports, and that's the Federalist position, high tariff. If there's a high tariff, a tax on companies importing goods, like an excise tax, but now on imports, that will raise the prices. If the prices go up, that will encourage domestic producers, either to produce more or convince people to start building manufacturing, whatever it might be, factories, let's say, to take advantage of the high prices. So this is basically saying prices are going to go up, but that will encourage domestic industry. And the most expensive time for any company is the beginning. That's when they have to make all the investment and before they really kind of figured things out, got efficient. So the beginning's always the most expensive. But I have to repeat, tariffs raise all prices. But the idea was so local producers could undercut importers. So everyone got this to encourage domestic production. And he's looking at Britain. Britain was making so much money trading and Britain was exporting to everybody, including the United States, and not really importing because they made everything. He wants to be that. So that's a picture of Liverpool. And one of the things that Britain really traded was a product that middle class, meaning people with jobs, but could afford some of the trappings of an upper class life, could buy these amazing pieces of porcelain copied from China. And it says even success to trade. That's what he's copying. They made so much of this porcelain, it became such a big deal. You're like, I made it. I'm something now, I can afford a little bit of this porcelain that Britain is now exporting. They exported so much from China, they started calling it China. You know, outside of China, of course. Well, this didn't pass. Washington didn't want this, and Republicans opposed. So the Republicans were able to push through a smaller tariff, we call a revenue tariff. That's just big enough to raise a little bit more revenue above the whiskey tax, but at the same time, not big enough to really protect industry. So Hamilton was quite disappointed. And Hamilton was going to try another crack at it, but he was so bitterly hated by everybody, he had to resign his position as Secretary of the Treasury. So he was only Treasury Secretary for 4 years. And that was it. And then he would basically be behind the scenes influencing until he died. But nobody really liked him. Now, these are the three big things. Everyone got that? Assumption, bank, tariff. But then there's one more that Hamilton will be in the middle of. Inflamed passions, much more. A little war. We dubbed it in the Americans, to keep it simple, the Anglo-French War. And it all stemmed from the French Revolution. The French Revolution in 1789. Hamilton, Washington, the Federalists, supported the British. As they saw the British, yeah, we might have broke away, but we still admired their economy, admired their trade, admired their system. Jefferson and the Republicans supported France. As they saw, well, first off, we're still allies from the Revolutionary War. Remember Saratoga. And Jefferson was like, they're following my Declaration of Independence. They're revolting for liberty, equality, and fraternity, the motto of France. That's me. I did this. So it was their revolution. So the Bastille was a fortification, then turned into a prison. It was basically empty in the middle of Paris. And when this was torn down in 1789, that was kind of the symbolic beginning of the French Revolution. They tore it down brick for brick. This massive castle that was in the middle of Paris. So if you go to Bastille Square today, the castle's gone. It was torn down. There's just a little marking in the sidewalk and around where the castle was in this big, huge square. Where they have a park and a big, kind of a massive, huge roundabout. And you want to hear my story from Bastille Square? I was in Bastille Square the first time my wife and I were in France. And it was night. We just flew in, a little bit of jet lag. And we're eating this little place. And we're outside on this square. And it's just sun's coming down. Like, geez, we're in Paris. We're really excited. My wife and I are very frugal, so we save money so we can travel. But anyway, we're sitting there. All of a sudden, people started cheering, and all of a sudden, crowds appeared everywhere. We have no idea what's going on. She can speak some French, I do words, but she got an idea. There's some kind of parade coming by, and also we see these, and they're bikers, and they had all kinds of little, like those little lights and things in their bicycles, so they're kind of flashy. They're carrying they have little glow sticks in their bike and wrapped around their head and stuff. You can see them coming. And they got closer and closer, and everyone started cheering. And there's thousands. I mean, thousands of these bikers. And they got closer and closer. And then we realized something very interesting. They were all naked. And so all these naked bikers were screaming, everybody's cheering at them. And they just went by for, I don't know, there's thousands. So I don't know, 20 minutes of naked bikers going by. Paris. Okay, so that was our first experience. And we're like, we're going to be in for an interesting time. That was it. There were no more naked bikers. I know. So if you're all thinking, I'm going to go see naked bikers all the time. Maybe one time, that's all I got. So when the French Revolution happened, and at first they forced the king to become a constitutional monarch, then they imprisoned him. And as soon as they imprisoned the king, everybody attacked him. Everybody in Europe attacked France. They're all monarchies. And they're thinking, we don't want this revolution to spread. So it became a worldwide war. But to the American point of view, the war was France and Britain. Anglo is a term for Britain. Especially after, and then when everyone attacked France, they freaked out and started killing their king, and they went through a terror. By the way, what was the new execution, the humane execution device that was invented just before the French Revolution?
The guillotine.
Yeah, the guillotine. It's very humane. What is exactly humane for killing somebody? Yeah, the French would use it till 1974. So, all of a sudden there's war, and the United States is kind of in it. Well, the French are like, hey, we're allies. Aren't you supposed to come to our aid? A French revolutionary, and he was dubbed Citizen Genet. So they got rid of titles of nobility like Sir or Sire. Everybody's equal. We're all citizens. Citizen Genet went to the United States and went through the country trying to convince people to join the revolution. And to the Federalists, he became a dangerous alien. Alien is somebody not of this country. Once again, as I mentioned aliens before, you might be thinking from outer space. No one called the potential alien from outer space. The term alien was not used for that until the great flying saucer craze of 1947. Yes, there was a flying saucer craze of 1947. Well, this would become quite controversial because to many Federalists, they saw this as almost treason trying to get us into a war. And it's going to become very divisive, especially when both the British and the French tried to hurt their economies. We call it a commercial war. Basically, both sides tried to blockade the other. And U.S. merchants who are trying to trade across the Atlantic or buy or sell to Britain or France, they're in the middle of it. Their ships are being stopped, and they go to the U.S. government, which is weak, and demand help. So Britain used their powerful fleet to blockade. France didn't have the fleet. I should add, the French, this is a French victory in 1798. The French did really well against everybody, which freaked the British out even more. So the U.S. declared neutrality, but the powers that be didn't care. French pirates called corsairs stopped American ships literally leaving American harbors. And the British put a blockade on France. Here's stopping an American ship. So American merchants are in the middle. Washington tried to be neutral. He even tried to negotiate a treaty with the British to stop some of the blockade, and the British hadn't left the Great Lakes. But to many Republicans, Washington, by declaring neutrality, is actually helping the British. And immediately started dubbing Washington a traitor. The treaty that would be negotiated is going to be called the Jay's Treaty. After the man who negotiated, give you an idea how, how still small the government was. Washington sent the very first Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. Remember, that was created with the Judiciary Act of 1789. John Jay, one of the authors of the Federalist Papers, sent the Chief Justice to Paris to negotiate a treaty with to London to negotiate a treaty with Britain. Could you imagine the Chief Justice today negotiating a treaty? Let me ask you another question. Who's the Chief Justice? So they named the court after the Chief Justice. So this court was called the Jay Court. What court is it today? Once again, time to know stuff, right? appointed by George W. Bush before you guys were born. His name is John Roberts. Very, very, very conservative jurist. So we're in the middle of the Roberts Court. We'll come back to that. We have a few more courts: Marshall Court, the Taney Court. Obviously, we can't go through every one, but there's certain ones you need to know. Warren Court will be one of the biggies. And so, Jay's Treaty. And Jay's Treaty was relatively pro-British. The British never really said, they kind of hemmed and hawed, but leave their forts literally in territory in the American side of the Great Lakes. They never really said they would end the blockade. They never really said they would open up fishing rights, for example, here. So the treaty seemed pro-British. And those Republicans used that to inflame passions, to say that the Federalists were traitors. And all along, they were pro-British, and they're going to bring the monarchy back, or make themselves king. And Washington was nothing but a pro-British plant. And here they're burning, an engraving of burning Jay's body in effigy. And it got very rancorous. And almost immediately, you can imagine what the Federalists are saying. You want to bring the guillotine here, Republicans. You want to bring the terror here. And both sides begin to call themselves traitors, treason, and not real Americans. I should add, if you think politics are rancorous today, think about it for a second. George Washington being called a traitor. And so these are the four big issues that the divide would be set. Republicans, Federalists. We got the divide now? We'll come back to it. And so, at the same time, in the Northwest, it's dubbed the Northwest Indian War. The Woodlands people were fighting back. Two powerful tribes, the Shawnee, who they're leading war. But remember, it's men and women make decisions. There's not all one, but a very dynamic man by the name of Blue Jacket, and then Little Turtle of the Miami. Little Turtle right there. And the thing I like about the Shawnee and Blue Jacket, so trading with the British, they traded, he made a trade basically for beaver pelts and got a bunch of old Royal Navy uniforms that were blue, officers' uniforms, and he just loved them. So that's what he wore, Blue Jacket. Hey, why not? And they formed a confederacy of tribes to stop the United States in the Northwest. Where's the Northwest in 1792? Ohio. That's the Northwest. Well, the United States does not have a standing army, and Washington wanted to drive them out of their land, take it, and give it to speculators and settlers. In fact, they would make a Fort Washington. Washington admired the Roman senator Cincinnatus, so that's Cincinnati, named after Washington's admiration of a Roman senator. Well, the militia under a former and mediocre Revolutionary General, Robert Sinclair, would march into Ohio, or sometimes it's called the Battle of the Wabash, right here, but everybody just referred to it as St. Clair's defeat. An absolutely humiliating defeat. And as I understand it, Blue Jacket was just an amazing tactician, sucking St. Clair in. It was snowing and cold, and then hit him in the flank. And this is one of the worst defeats in U.S. military history. You got to look at a few battles, like Little Bighorn or Korea 1950. Just a few battles were this horrific. Washington lied about it over and over again. Is that whole cherry tree thing? Not true. Lied about it, but used that as an excuse to create a standing army. So the U.S. standing army came out of a disaster. And this is when the army we have today was created in 1792 after Washington lied and misled Congress about how bad it was. So, St. Clair's defeat. This is the retreat. They show them in uniform. They were militia. They didn't have uniforms. And so, the Confederacy won this big battle. And I forgot to mention the British. The British were helping, but not that much. They promised some weapons, but not a lot. The big thing is they promised cannon and did not deliver. The British were just like, okay, you want to help your land, we'll kind of poke the Americans, but not a lot. And that's going to lead to the new US Army with the Confederacy kind of breaking up for various personal reasons. A battle called Fallen Timbers, it's 3 years later, and a massive US victory. This time now, a trained professional army under General Mad Anthony Wayne fought right here. Right in the site of a British fort they had not abandoned. The British had not abandoned Fort Miami, but the British did not come help their so-called allies. And now this Confederacy would be broken up and they would be forced to sign a treaty called the Treaty of Greenville. And the Treaty of Greenville was one of the most important treaties in history. First off, it laid out that the woodland nations were technically independent. We signed a treaty with them. But they gave up all this land. See right here? In Ohio. That would be given up to the United States, right here. Now, what about this land? In the treaty, it said that the various tribes, the woodland nations, would have that land. Anybody want to guess for how long? Years? Forever. Forever it's their land. Anybody want to guess how long forever lasts? Minutes. Until U.S. settlers came in and started stealing the land and speculators started scooping it up. And that's going to lead to more wars. Add one thing to this. This was probably the best chance American Indians had to stop the United States. If they could have kept the Confederacy together, who knows? But after this, there's probably no chance. There'd be one more time Confederacy had a chance under a guy named Tecumseh. There'd be a battle called Tippecanoe. And the comical sounding name overshadows what a big battle it was. So, Washington, when he left office in 1796, his farewell address, he was actually quite distraught. He's now being called a traitor by people who were once his friends. And even though he had a lot to do with it, he wanted all the people criticizing him arrested. He wanted their speech to be stopped. He wanted pro-Republican newspapers to have their printing presses broken. So let's be clear. He was part of this too. But he warned two things in his farewell address. And that's his handwritten, saved copy of it. Avoid foreign entanglements because of how divisive they were. But don't forget, he's the one who created the standing army. He's the one that attacked into the woodland nations. So he's being not exactly honest here. And secondly, avoid the partisan political divide. The parties will divide us. Now, he did not believe, hey, let's all come together and come up with a solution. He said in the document, those who disagreed with me are wrong and should shut up. Therefore, there's no partisan divide. My way, the Federalist way, is right. But this is going to become kind of like, oh, he wanted to avoid the political rancor. No. Here is Hamilton and Jefferson pulling apart the federal edifice. And this is Washington in his farewell address, like divine from the clouds. It's telling them to stop. This is supposed to be clouds. I know it looks like he's in the middle of a rock, like an old stone castle. So now we're going to have the first contested election in American history. The election of 1796. The first election. So remember, Washington was elected unanimously. Nobody ran against him. But this time, the sitting vice president against the former Secretary of State wants friends. Remember, Adams got Jefferson to write the Declaration of Independence. Once friends are now enemies. And remember what I told you about the way they draw pictures? A little bit less obvious here. Adams, the sitting vice president. Each elector had 2 votes. So the Constitution was you would vote for 2 people for president. Whoever got the most votes, president. Second most votes, vice president. And they immediately realized, oh God, we screw up. Well, everybody else who wanted to be president, they all basically backed out and said, don't vote for me for president. If I'm a Federalist, vote for Adams or vice versa. But I want to be vice president. but there's no ticket. Like today, we have Trump, Vance, Harris, Walz. No, it wasn't like that. Because you have 2 votes. This is all being created. This was kind of unplanned. And it was really a nasty campaign. So the Republicans, here's a Republican handbill. Turn out and save your country from reunion. Down with the Tories, down with the British faction, AKA the Federalists. And this is in New York, so they're trying to say, well, for Jefferson for president, Clinton for vice president. But there are many different people to vote for vice president. That's why it's not really a ticket. Tory were the loyalists against the Patriots in the Revolutionary War. So they're calling Federalists traitors. It was a poster made anti-Republican, and it's trying to show the march of progress led by Washington, so vote for the Federalists. And here's Jefferson and Madison trying to pull it back, and no progress. AKA, they're against the country's progress. They're traitors too. When the election happened, so the state sent their electors, there was no popular vote. State assemblies picked the electors cast their ballot. Adams won. But Jefferson is vice president. Most Federalists voted for Timothy P. to be vice president, but not enough. So now you have the leader of the Federalist Party as president and the leader of the Republican Party as vice president. Once again, to give you an example of today, be Biden as president, Trump as vice president. The leader of the opposition is in the executive branch and breaks ties in the Senate. Immediately they realize this is a train wreck. And they started talking about, what do we do? Do we get rid of the Electoral College? And then there was a suggestion. Why not just have a popular vote for president? Are you crazy? We don't want a democracy. So that didn't happen. So, this is the situation. And almost immediately the war picked up. Last thing for today, write down the XYZ affair. The XYZ are nicknames for 3 French ministers in the foreign ministry. The Americans wanted to see, they sent their ambassador, actually a contemporary, a diplomat, to go see the foreign minister of France, Talleyrand. He's right here. And when he approached the French ministers to go see the foreign minister, they demanded a bribe. 3 French officials demanded a bribe. You give us money or tribute, and we'll let you see Talleyrand. Now, President Adams, who hates the French anyways, sees this as a massive insult, which it was. What disrespect for the United States. The United States is such a weak country, you're going to have to sweeten the pot, or we're going to treat you like nothing. So here are the French stealing from American treasure, and here is Lady Columbia representing America, and you notice the feathers? American Indians, liberty. Tomorrow, war, Jefferson, and Ohio not becoming a state. You can do work and video work on Ohio. Was a little scary. Yeah, thanks. You should have went here. Goodbye, everyone. Have a good Wednesday. So. Some of my not.
It's gonna drop right even though I got it.
I love Mythbusters.
And these have, they're basically going to have 5 of them. That's good. It's really good. Goodbye. And you got a 9-year quiz? 8. What's your miss?
I think the gender criticism. I put something else.
That's it. Yeah, come on. 8 out. That's a good job. See ya? Hey, let's take a quiz. Yes.
So before that, I'm gonna go.
Hey, thanks for letting me know. Have a good time.
Partridge.
Yeah.
Do you have news?
I have a quiz.
Yes.
What do you mean, do we
Jets head coach is fired.
Yeah, I saw that.
Aaron Rodgers is now the new head coach.
But it's pretty much like that, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, Aaron Rodgers is something else, isn't it?
It's always the head coach's fault, just like it was from Matt before. It's always the coach's fault.
Yeah.
Aaron Rodgers.
Yep, the big play guys always get what they want. You're exactly right.
That's what chapter 6.
I swear you said Friday. No, you're
Okay, okay.
That's right. It's just a supplemental reading, sir.
Oh, yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah.
No, I was finding out. I'm real.
Oh, dude.
Think about it.
Let me guess.
You guys. No. You guys.
508.
That's the truth. Deny it as thou shalt we. Don't say that word. Yes.
Yeah.
I don't like it.
Big blue shirt.
No.
Play. Hey, who would like to take a quiz? It's unanimous. Action paper. I counted it.
That's right. Quiz.
It is unanimous for the quiz. All right, half sheet of paper. Let's number it 1 to 1 billion. Or 8, whatever comes first.
You said that.
Hey, everybody. Let's see. 3 minutes. 11 minutes. How long are the periods on ID? Is there a
38, I
period?
think.
What's that?
38. There's one 37, I think. No, most of them are 37, one of them is 38.
Okay. So how about we should, okay, I'm sorry. I have to wait like a month to get my green bottle back.